este ano sob o tema de Positive Turn, Materiais, Edifícios e Cidades para um Futuro Regenerativo. Com curadoria de João Pedro Sousa, este encontro reúne arquitetos e investigadores de referência mundial para refletir sobre como o setor pode transformar-se de problema climático em motor de regeneração. Para dar início à jornada, teremos a intervenção do diretor executivo da Casa da Arquitectura, Nuno Sampaio.
Já não basta minimizar os danos, chegou a hora da arquitetura dar um contributo positivo e devolver mais do que o consome. Bom dia a todos, é com muito gosto que posso abrir este seminário, que é muito mais, ou pretende ser muito mais do que apenas um seminário, pretende ser um ponto de viragem. E quero agradecer, em primeiro lugar, naturalmente, ao Ministério do Ambiente, ao seu curador aqui do seminário, convidado pela Casa da Arquitectura, o José Pedro Sousa, e também um painel muito alargado de convidados nacionais e internacionais que vêm à Casa partilhar algumas das suas preocupações, das suas visões e de pensarmos o futuro. Temos de caminhar para uma nova era em que a arquitetura é parte mais ativa do que foi até agora. Portugal assumiu um compromisso para a neutralidade carbónica em 2050, depois, mais tarde, antecipou na COP do Egito para 2045. Estamos aqui, em Matosinhos, uma cidade muito comprometida com o ambiente, em que colocou como meta municipal chegar à neutralidade carbónica em apenas 2030. O processo construtivo e os edifícios são fundamentais para podermos cumprir o Plano Ecológico Europeu e o Plano de Energia e Clima 2030. Para atingir as metas governamentais, definidas também pela União Europeia, é necessário acelerar a transformação para uma arquitetura de menor impacto, com processos construtivos diferenciados e um menor custo de manutenção e exploração dos edifícios. A arquitetura e os seus processos têm de mudar e, mais do que isso, têm que ser eles próprios geradores de mudança. É perceptível, naturalmente, que estamos a chegar ao fim de um ciclo de esgotamento dos recursos naturais, visto que eles são finitos, e segundo o que diz a ONU, nos últimos 40 anos, algumas das matérias-primas tiveram uma duplicação de consumo e há algumas áreas muito específicas, quase que uma triplicação apenas em 40 anos. Para evitar o esgotamento destes recursos, é necessário repensar o processo da construção e, simultaneamente, de forma urgente, acelerar a renovação de um parque edificado com necessidade de redução da intensidade carbónica e da promoção da renovação energética. Em Portugal, 2/3 dos edifícios são anteriores a 1990. É uma consciência que todos que trabalhamos em Portugal temos, muitos deles feitos por profissionais que não eram arquitetos e que não tinham, naturalmente, as preocupações com a sustentabilidade do próprio consumo energético do edifício. E desses 35%, 2/3 desses 2/3 são anteriores a 1940. Portanto, vemos bem a necessidade que temos de conseguir intervir neste parque habitacional, tendo como objetivo a sua transformação, a transformação da exploração do dia-a-dia dos edifícios. Eu trago aqui alguns números que naturalmente nos tocam a todos. Estudos da União Europeia, e portanto referimos-nos ao espaço da União Europeia, que é em si, digamos, um espaço do ponto de vista das preocupações com o meio ambiente, vai um bocadinho mais à frente do que outras partes do planeta e que nos fazem naturalmente refletir. No espaço europeu, a construção e o uso dos edifícios ocupam 40% da energia total utilizada neste espaço europeu. A construção e o uso dos edifícios são responsáveis por 35% das emissões dos gases de efeito de estufa produzidos na União Europeia. A construção e os usos dos edifícios são responsáveis pelo consumo de 30% da água potável e responsáveis por 35% de todos os resíduos gerados no espaço europeu. Estes números, naturalmente, têm que nos deixar preocupados e fazer-nos refletir. Quando falamos do espaço europeu, um espaço, não diria de privilégio, digamos, temos muito para fazer no espaço europeu, na União Europeia. As preocupações são talvez de uma consciência mais alargada do que outras áreas do planeta e, portanto, deixa-nos ainda mais preocupados e com a necessidade de ter uma estratégia que não é naturalmente continental, mas é completamente global. Temos de mudar os paradigmas contemporâneos de produzir, consumir e descartar para podermos readaptar e reutilizar. Álvaro Siza definia a boa arquitetura como aquela que tem capacidade de perdurar, que aguenta, que resiste, que vai resistindo de alguma maneira bem ao longo do tempo. E é um conceito que a mim me pareceu importante trazê-lo aqui, porque neste contexto temos que conseguir aumentar naturalmente a vida útil dos edifícios, das cidades, criar soluções com flexibilidade que se ajustem à mudança que o tempo impõe. A utilização de tipologias e construtivas duradouras tem que ser um objetivo hoje de quando se começa a pensar um projeto a partir da raiz. Para diminuir a deslocação e o tráfego nas cidades, sabemos que hoje as habitações são têm muito mais uso do que só apenas para dormir. As habitações hoje são também espaços de trabalho, todos nós trabalhamos em casa, todos nós, já de uma forma muito global e principalmente a partir do que foi o Covid, fazemos da nossa casa um espaço de trabalho, trabalhamos em teletrabalho e, portanto, também a tipologia da habitação tem que ser naturalmente repensada. As cidades devem hoje ser mais regenerativas e, quando pensamos as tipologias dos edifícios, pensamos a cidade, as suas deslocações necessárias, etc. As cidades têm que ser regenerativas, estruturas vivas que constroem uma recuperação global do território e têm sido cada vez, naturalmente, e assistido em direto nós, assolados por grandes catástrofes resultantes das alterações climáticas. Quero também aqui, hoje, relembrar um colega que desapareceu devido a um trágico acidente no Brasil, um arquiteto chinês, com Jiangui, uma perda naturalmente lamentável e reforçar a admiração que temos pelo trabalho que fez, essencialmente na construção do conceito da cidade esponja, que lida com a água, com estes grandes momentos de precipitação e, portanto, de excesso de água nas cidades e, às vezes, também a falta dela. E, portanto, o conceito das cidades esponjas, transformando umas estruturas ecológicas vivas, foi um legado fundamental que eu quero aqui hoje recordar. Mas este seminário que hoje aqui se inicia é uma viragem muito positiva. O José Pedro Sousa irá aqui explicar um pouco a estrutura que pensou das materiais, edifícios e as cidades, e que trouxe aqui um conjunto de colegas que têm como objetivo fazer-nos a todos pensar. Os desafios do nosso tempo são muitos. É exigido aos arquitetos que sejam promotores da mudança, criadores de inovação e líderes dessa transformação. Isso é, naturalmente, algo que me preocupa, porque, infelizmente, não temos vistos a sociedade dos arquitetos tão desperta, tão ativa, tão transformadora como gostaríamos e, portanto, é um esforço que temos que fazer de encontro classe, conseguir produzir as alterações necessárias à produção da arquitetura, como o fizemos noutros tempos. Ontem tivemos as visitas às empresas inovadoras, um momento também de partilha. É muito importante e este paradigma que hoje se transformou, temos que arquitetos, engenheiros, a indústria da construção, os construtores, pensarmos em soluções em conjunto e, portanto, eu queria também saudar aqui todos aqueles que ontem participaram nesta comunhão de soluções e também dizer que o Shift é um espaço de educação, é um espaço de reflexão. Estiveram aqui mais de 1.800 crianças ontem. Foi bastante bonito assistirmos à preocupação que as novas gerações têm com o ambiente e como elas querem e estão suscetíveis a aprender a importância da arquitetura como fator transformador da sua cidade. Então o Shift é uma viragem positiva e um apelo à ação. O meu desejo, naturalmente, é que seja um ótimo dia de trabalho, que as reflexões sejam partilhadas entre todos, essencialmente que nos estimulem na prática profissional conseguirmos produzir mudanças. Muito obrigado a todos e um ótimo dia de trabalho. Zé Pedro, chamo-te aqui ao palco para continuares este seminário e muito obrigado pela tua participação e pelo teu contributo. Muito obrigado a todos.
Ora então, muito bom dia a todos. É com enorme entusiasmo que dou as boas-vindas a este Shift de Positive Turn aqui na Casa da Arquitectura. E começava justamente por reconhecer e felicitar a visão que esta casa teve há uns anos de criar e pensar um ciclo regular dedicado à arquitetura e à sustentabilidade, no momento em que essa discussão é simultaneamente urgente, crítica e complexa, como foi aqui sublinhado. Sabemos muito bem que a indústria da construção é um dos epicentros da atual crise climática, pelo CO2 que emite, pelos recursos que consome, pela escala que tem, pelo impacto territorial que gera, mas se está no centro do problema, também está no centro da solução, o que representa uma enorme responsabilidade, mas também uma extraordinária oportunidade de reafirmar o valor da nossa disciplina, da arquitetura e da construção, como forças transformadoras positivas. Neste contexto, a edição do Shift deste ano parte de uma convicção simples. Já não basta descrever o problema, que todos temos conhecimento, chegou o momento de discutir soluções. E foi com esse espírito que nasceu o título desta edição, de Positive Turn. A ideia de uma viragem positiva, não apenas simbólica, mas realmente como pretendemos que seja literal. É tempo, então, de deixarmos de pensar em mitigar, reduzir ou compensar e começarmos a imaginar formas de regenerar, restaurar e criar impacto positivo. E quando falamos de regeneração, não falamos apenas de energia ou carbono. Falamos de ecossistemas, de biodiversidade, de bem-estar, de cultura. Falamos de recalibrar o papel do ser humano na sua relação com a natureza, com os outros e com o território, e de pensar a arquitetura como uma força de cuidado, de regeneração do futuro. Para isso, pensou-se e organizou-se esta edição em 3 momentos: uma visita, um seminário e um workshop. Vamos começar rapidamente pela visita que decorreu ontem e onde fomos ao terreno visitar 3 empresas que, à sua maneira, estão já a marcar esta transformação. Começamos na Emerge Motengil, que também está aqui presente, e onde percebemos que a industrialização da construção pode ser colocada ao serviço da inovação sustentável, com escala, com estratégia, e vimos aqui projetos desenvolvidos em conjunto com arquitetos reconhecidos, o que marca uma aposta na qualidade e uma aposta na ambição do impacto que estes projetos podem ter. Prosseguimos depois pela Avelar, que é uma startup portuguesa que iniciou aqui em Portugal o tema da impressão 3D aplicada à construção de edifícios e que com isso procura uma nova forma mais rápida, mais eficiente, com mais otimização material de construir. mas que também, de uma forma crítica, olha para o material e tenta inovar, tenta desenvolver argamassas mais sustentáveis para elevar ainda mais a dimensão sustentável deste sistema de construção. E terminamos na Amorim Cork Solutions, onde vimos um material, que é a cortiça, um material ancestral, e percebemos a forma como este material pode desempenhar um papel absolutamente central nesta ideia de regeneração. Tal é o seu valor ecológico e tal é a diversidade de aplicações que este material tem, não só na arquitetura, mas em outras áreas também de produção. E desta forma queria agradecer às 3 empresas a hospitalidade com que nos receberam e partilharam esta informação connosco. Avançamos então agora para o segundo momento, que é aquele que nos traz aqui hoje, que é o seminário. No fundo, este centro de reflexão deste shift de positive turn. E é então uma enorme honra e uma grande alegria poder contar com um grupo de distintos oradores, diferentes gerações, geografias e experiências, e que aceitaram e mostraram disponibilidade para estar aqui connosco hoje e partilhar também a sua experiência e também a sua visão. Portanto, também a todos os oradores e moderadores, queria também deixar desde já o meu agradecimento e dizer que é uma honra poder estar aqui convosco. E este debate foi então organizado aqui em 3 escalas, em 3 sessões. Começaremos pelos materiais, depois os edifícios e chegaremos a seguir às cidades. Os materiais, que é a sessão que se vai seguir a esta intervenção, vamos começar onde tudo arranca, não é? Que é a escolha da matéria, perceber a forma como a extraímos, transformamos e reutilizamos. A apresentação, a keynote, será dada por Suzanne Brosson, arquiteta e investigadora do Báltico, cujo trabalho combina saberes vernaculares, materiais locais, projeto climático para enfrentar os desafios das alterações globais. A conversa será moderada por Jorge Fernandes, investigador, arquiteto da Universidade do Minho, também, e contará com 3 convidados com abordagens distintas. A Cláudia Escaleira, investigadora de práticas de reutilização e circularidade, ligada a nada novo. Ignácio Pérez Arnal, um arquiteto que vem de Barcelona e professor também, para falar de inovação, tecnologia, BIM. E a Cristina Veríssimo, uma arquiteta com uma prática profissional e que vem demonstrando uma grande sensibilidade e atenção ao material. E, portanto, tenho a certeza que teremos aqui uma discussão muito profícua sobre este ponto de partida, não é? Ponto de partida depois para a escala dos edifícios, a escala do projeto, a escala da energia incorporada, dos espaços que habitamos e das relações que geramos. E teremos aqui o João Albuquerque, que é partner nos BIG Argingles, e é o diretor do seu escritório em Barcelona, e que tem aqui uma ligação muito forte aqui connosco, com vários projetos que estão a acontecer aqui em Portugal. E a seguir teremos uma conversa moderada por Adrian Kreslik, também um investigador e profissional especialista nesta área da ecologia, da pedagogia, da inovação digital, e que moderará uma conversa com a Ana Cabrita, que vem do lado do imobiliário, da sustentabilidade, dar-nos aqui uma perspectiva complementar àquela que nós arquitetos estamos habituados a discutir aqui entre nós. A ideia é expandir, abrir este discurso. O João Castelo Branco, um jovem arquiteto dos Horizonte, que usa este tema também como forma de se posicionar e de explicar, digamos, aos clientes o valor acrescentado que a arquitetura traz no desenho do projeto quando tem esta consciência. E a Bárbara Miranda, também uma jovem arquiteta que vem da Alemanha agora, que trabalhou, tem um percurso muito interessante com arquitetos reconhecidos, a trabalhar com materiais como a terra, e agora está ligada ao German Sustainable Building Council. Prosseguiremos depois, por fim, para a escala das cidades. A escala onde tudo se cruza, habitação, mobilidade, ecologia, cultura, política também. Teremos aqui connosco o Carlo Ratti, arquiteto, urbanista, diretor do Sensible City Lab no MIT e também o diretor da Bienal de Arquitetura de Veneza, que ainda está em curso. Uma figura incontornável no pensamento sobre cidades inteligentes, sensíveis e regenerativas. A sessão de conversa será moderada também pela Andreia Garcia, uma arquiteta e curadora, também foi responsável pela presença de Portugal na Bienal de Veneza anterior. E nesta conversa teremos aqui o Joaquim Santiago, dos Leco Studio, quem nunca ouviu falar dos superblocos de Barcelona, pois eles desenharam alguns deles. O Zé Lameiras, da Faculdade de Ciências do Porto, de Arquitetura Paisagista, aqui um incansável pensador da nossa cidade, dos problemas e da renaturalização ou da reconfiguração da nossa relação com a natureza. A Teresa Cálix, da Faculdade de Arquitetura, que para além de trabalhar nesta área do planeamento, também coordena um projeto que é o NEB Go South, ligado à New European Bauhaus, onde colabora com outras escolas de arquitetura do sul da Europa para repensar estes temas em conjunto. E, portanto, aqui vai-se refletir sobre como a cidade se pode tornar um instrumento ativo de reparação ecológica nos dias de hoje. Finalmente, o terceiro momento será amanhã, onde passaremos à ação com o workshop de Positive Turn da Tradição à Inovação, orientado por Ardin Kreslik, que desafia recém-licenciados e jovens arquitetos a experimentar aqui práticas onde cruzamos saberes vernaculares para pensar e projetar o futuro. Portanto, será aqui uma experiência interessante que posteriormente se pretende também que seja disseminada os resultados que daí venham a acontecer. E não vos vou roubar mais tempo, estamos todos aqui para ouvir, eu também, para aprender, para discutir, para avançar, mas antes de terminar, queria deixar um agradecimento muito especial à Casa da Arquitectura, em nome do diretor executivo Nuno Sampaio, agradecer a confiança e o convite para pensar aqui em conjunto esta edição do Shift, e também queria tecer um profundo agradecimento à equipa de produção, à Helena, ao Pedro, ao Mário, ao Luís, à Ana, enfim, e muitos mais que foram incansáveis e tornaram possível esta edição. Eu já ouvi aqui de outros participantes aqui manifestar o agrado pela forma fluida como tudo está a acontecer e, portanto, convosco o Shift e esta edição do Positive Turn é de facto mais do que uma conferência. Vamos então inspirar-nos, vamos fazer esta viragem acontecer. Muito obrigado.
Abrimos então o primeiro módulo temático dedicado aos materiais com Suzanne Brorson, do estúdio Suzanne Brorson, cujo trabalho cruza investigação e prática em arquitetura climática e regenerativa na região do Mar Báltico.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. Starting now, right? I have a timer here. Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here at the Shift, the Positive Turn International Seminar here in Porto. It's my honor to come here. My name is Susan. There's some echo, I think. It's okay. My name is Susan Brorson, and I'm with my office. I'm based on an island in the Baltic Sea, Rügen, which is where I grew up and which is where I returned to after spending many years working abroad as an architect in London, Oslo, Amsterdam, and Berlin. Island Ecologies is the title of my lecture, and I will show you some of my work from research, teaching, and practice. The location of this island, maybe I should explain this, is a little bit special. It's in the very north of Germany, bordering Denmark, Sweden, and Poland, and it used to be part of East Germany. So from a German perspective, this island of Rügen is always looked at as being the official end of the world. The island of Rügen is, among other things, famous because the painter Caspar David Friedrich was very much in love with it 250 years ago. He spent a lot of time on the island, and this particular painting here, The Monk by the Sea, is regarded as the beginning of modern painting by many experts. Out of all places, it was created there, on Rügen, in this remote and stormy corner of the world. Maybe it needed to be the end of the world, this island, to imagine something further away and to be able to paint something that you cannot see. On September 25th, 2022, I sat on the ferry from Sweden to Rügen. Pretty much at the same time, a small sailboat started its journey in the opposite direction, sailing from Rügen towards the open Baltic, manned with only 4 people, I think, who used 500 kilograms of TNT to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline that used to transport gas from Russia to Germany. 300,000 tons of gas escaped, and if we had used it to heat our houses, as we still do a lot in Germany, this would have released 669 tons of CO2. This photo shows the port of Sassnitz on the island of Rügen these days. This big ship here in this photo is a LNG, liquid gas ship, that is now anchoring there. Fracking gas now arrives from the United States to Rügen. In the far back, you can see the famous white cliffs of Rügen that Caspar David Friedrich loved to paint, now part of a national park. The island of Rügen, the LNG port of Sassnitz, the end of the world, it seems to be very interesting to Russian military planes lately that have been spotted almost weekly during the past year, flying close to the island with their transponders switched off. It gets rather noisy when the Eurofighter jets lift from their airbase in Rostock, flying low across the island to escort the Russian planes out. Suddenly, the island of Rügen, or the end of the world, has become the place where it's all happening. I took this photo in January this year in the port of Sassnitz, and it shows a Russian oil ship held captive by German police boats. It belonged to the so-called Schattenflotte, which translates as shadow fleet, or maybe rather shady fleet of rusty Russian oil ships cruising the Baltic, bypassing the export embargo on Russian oil. Most of these ships are very old and in extremely bad shape. No one really wants to imagine an oil spill in Baltic landscapes, but this is maybe a new dimension of warfare, the threat of environmental destruction. The current global crisis, the war in Ukraine, territorial questions have often and throughout history largely been about resources, oil and gas, building materials from fossil resources. We are here to talk about transformations, materials, and a positive turn in architecture. And it seems pretty clear that we have advanced from being confronted with a climate or environmental crisis to something much worse. We as architects have all the knowledge that we need. We decide on the materials that we are designing with, and we urgently have to play our cards. I'm closing this first part of my presentation with a quote by Carlo Scarpa. To achieve anything, we have to invent relationships. 20 years ago, and after finishing my diploma at Bauhaus University in Weimar, I went to work for a few years in London. It was the time when the topic of sustainability grew in importance, and many architects started to engage with the meaning of context, also very much as a response to suddenly having to evaluate the quality of architecture through questionable sustainable rating systems. It was in summer in 2005 that I visited my family on vacation from London, and then it suddenly stood in front of me. This old, pretty, derelict, should I say worn down, thatched house on the Baltic island of Rügen, and it was for sale. I was 25 and I had no money, obviously, but I suddenly realized what I really wanted to know, how to design around the Baltic. Before I felt I could start working on my new project, or let alone draw a line, I needed to know more. I wondered what would be truly sustainable, a bit ambitious, and very soon started exploring traditional buildings and the vernacular architecture of the Baltic Sea region. I was quite intrigued by the inherent climate response to the seasonal climate of the Baltic and how the use of local materials supported that. I registered my PhD with the Institute of Architecture in Berlin. It has taken 10 years to finish it. Next time I would maybe choose a smaller research area. Anyway, the title, Baltic Vernacular, a topological research as tool for climatic design. So my research has been examining rural vernacular architecture of the Baltic Sea region, comparing predominant typologies in 3 different environmental zones and across opposite coasts, with a focus on peasant dwellings, simultaneously extracting climatic design strategies that might be relevant today. But I did not get all the information I needed from synthesizing national historic ethnographic research. So I understood that I needed to start traveling through Baltic landscapes, and this time for real. Several journeys have taken me around the Baltic to observe buildings in their context, climate, and landscape. My youngest daughter was with me a lot, that was not always as enthusiastic about it as me. Islands started to emerge as especially interesting. Limited in size, there was always, rather often, only a limited or specific palette of materials available, going hand in hand with local knowledge and craftsmanship. One very good example is the small island of Faro in Sweden, next to Gotland. There, roofs are typically thatched with a special cutting grass, arc or Cladium mariscus, that grows on the island. It needs to be cut regularly, otherwise it overgrows the meadows where the sheep are grazing. So this material is used for thatching or roofing. In summer 23, I had the opportunity to join a local home building union if this is correct, for the annual mowing of one of the island's meadows. We started very early on a summer morning, and then everyone stood in a line and forked away the grass that was cut on a probably 4 to 5 square meter large meadow. And typically the thatching event is following the next day, where everyone helps to thatch the roof of one of the islanders. And simultaneously it's a big party, there's music and food, and the music actually helps to stomp the grass in between the rafters. Drawing, or the repeated redrawing of the 32 case studies by simultaneously analyzing photographs for information on context and landscape helped me to understand how these buildings were embedded in their landscapes, and I started to imagine how people lived in them throughout the year and throughout the seasons. Several simulations were also carried out on these case studies, and each time the program would spit out one of these graphics. These are wind simulations. I have been amazed how buildings were almost perfectly oriented towards the predominant wind direction, and how actually also vegetation helped to support this. And altogether it reveals a very complex and very clever balancing out of a response to all 4 climate elements: sun, wind, precipitation and temperature. Especially the use of vegetation and which type is actually something that's super interesting to me, so always buildings together with vegetation around it. And if I would have time for another PhD, I would certainly look into this. There are of course no clear borders or boundaries where one typology starts or where the next one starts. So on the left you can see the predominant typologies of the Baltic Sea region that I identified, and added to that the 32 case studies, and together it forms a kind of picture or a pattern of vernacular dwelling. Seasonal dwelling is something that I am particularly interested in, or houses were lived in during several times of the year, and for the whole of the research area, seasonal dwelling was a key characteristic. In the south, with less extreme temperature changes, the floor area used to shrink around a small area around the fireplace, and then it would expand towards the warmer season into unheated spaces or external spaces. And then the further north you move, buildings start to change, and a different pattern starts to emerge where there's dedicated winter and summer dwellings. So the same building could not answer these temperature ranges, so you have to move between winter and summer dwelling. But it's not only about a question of performance, but very much related to a very special architectural quality and also climatic atmospheres, I would call it, by embracing these different seasonal conditions. This floor plan of a summer kitchen from Estonia here on the left-hand side is one of my favorite findings, and it suggests that this must be the minimum area or space needed in summer. So a sauna and a bathhouse that you could also sleep in, and some small space to cook and eat. So in summer, life happens outside in a short summer, and simultaneously thermal delights like a sauna are very much needed in winter too. How climatic, but also how much atmospheric qualities of Baltic vernacular architecture were created as part of my research as well. So which materials support certain climatic or architectural atmospheres, how they feel warm or cold, or are they black and white, so how do they receive solar radiation. And of course also phenomenological things like the smell of pine tar or the smell of seaweed, grass and fern. Baltic landscapes as resources for building materials. The vernacular architecture, or the architecture of the poor, is on the contrary very rich, so not only rich in knowledge but intelligent in understanding about all these complex entanglements or the relationships that Carlos Scarpa spoke of. What I think was one of the most significant findings of my research is that vernacular architecture was very experimental, so developing over centuries through a trial and error method, each time trying to improve and make something better. Always aimed at knowledge generation and presented and documented to the architecture itself as epistemic artifacts. Parallel to my research, I established the Baltic Vernacular Experimental Laboratory, a teaching format starting in 2017, and it has traveled with me through several universities around the Baltic, so I've been using my findings from research to test and experiment with students or through teaching, through various formats, engaging in design research, design experimentation, but also a lot of one-to-one built material and spatial experiments. So for example, in January 23, we went to the island of Læsø in Denmark with students from Hafen City University in Hamburg to explore the famous local seaweed roofs. I think everyone who engages in natural building materials has heard about these ones. We were very lucky to meet the only still living seaweed thatcher, Henning Johansen, who told us all about it and actually also showed us how to twist seaweed. And some of these roofs in Læsø are almost 400 years old, and one especially and very interesting material property is that it does not burn. They're very archaic, these roofs, and when we went down to the beach, it dawned to us what they reminded us of. Sea monsters suddenly emerging from the sea, just like the material itself. For me, seaweed is a very interesting resource as it arrives on the island of Rügen in very large amounts and is cleared from the beaches on an everyday basis by heavy machinery because it's disturbing the tourists. So then, back in Hamburg, I gave out a small design task, a seaweed monster summer kitchen, playing on the seaweed's inflammable capacities, but also leaning on the typical Baltic summer kitchen. A design-build workshop was then held on the island of Rügen, and guess who joined us, which was super nice? Henning Johansen from the island of Læsø. The knowledge of how to work with seaweed was passed on through that workshop to 20 students, and the summer kitchen was inaugurated with a very large smoky barbecue. Simultaneously to research and teaching, I experimented with a small house on the island of Rügen that I had spontaneously purchased some years back. As found, the building was of the EW58 type, a serial building design that was developed in East Germany to tackle the post-war housing crisis, so quite the opposite of vernacular actually. It was built over 500,000 times from the coast to the mountains. And over the years, I've experimented with climatic design principles extracted from my research, aiming to recontextualize and to climate adapt this building. So besides the general refurbishment, interventions were actually very small. It was also a question of budget, of course, and one of the most prominent changes was actually just the erection of a wall in between the two houses to the north, and through that creating a wind-protected courtyard, and through that a microclimate. It's always a few degrees warmer than in the surrounding gardens. The material palette is very simple. The roof is thatched with reed from a lagoon close by, and there's timber floors, the same timbers used on the floors in the house and also outside. And the walls are painted with the local chalk paint. A later addition to this experimental house is a small building at rear, the black-white house, playing on the albedo effect, and it's actually also a seasonal typology. It has an insulated black space, which is a sauna and a summer living room, so you can sit in the garden and work and eat while it's very windy and probably rainy outside. So a lot of experimentation has happened around this experimental house. It has won quite a few awards and has been published a lot. And in this axonometric drawing, you can see some of the experiments that have happened around this house as part of the experimental laboratory. So the seaweed kitchen in the back and the black and white house. And in front, on the western gable, you can see another experiment that has been going on for 4 years now, seasonal wall dressing, that I would like to introduce a little bit more. So as part of my research, I found photographs like these from archives, and I could not quite understand what this is. But these are winter facades that were common in the southern Baltic Sea region. So one type, for example, called Sagata here in the middle, used wooden sticks in front of wind and weather exposed facades. And a layer of biogenic material was just stuffed behind, so things that you would have left over from the harvest or in the garden. So old leaves, straw, garden weeds, pine needles. And on the right-hand side, the photo on top is from a small peninsula. So they used a different material for that, but what they had. So it's bracken or fern, this water plant that you can see here. In spring, these winter facades would be typically removed, just composted or burned. I was quite interested in trying this out. I could not really understand how this worked, but I wanted to play with the aesthetics of natural materials. So I started an experiment to turn the western gable of the experimental house into one big loom, into which several natural materials could be woven, very much inspired by the beautiful textile art by the Bauhaus artist Gunther Stölzel. So we turned the western gable of the experimental house into a big loom, putting a framework of large battens with wire running across. And then we were testing beforehand which patterns for the seasonal dress we could create using several available local natural materials. And then we started a summer workshop or island workshop with students from Riziba University Riga, and we've been weaving the facade dress with materials that we found close by, so garden weeds, seaweed, grass, reed, but also off-the-shelf reed mats. This is how it looks now. The seasonal wall dress was also presented at the Constructive Disobedience Conference, and there's a beautiful publication, and it was also part of the Slovenian pavilion at the Architecture Biennial in 23, +-1 in search of wall-tempered architecture. Every year, the seasonal wall dress has to be taken care of. In 23, with students from Hamburg, and last year, 50 students from the Royal Danish Academy in Copenhagen came to weave the facade dress. A project, so I'm not only experimenting with things like that, is a project that was completed with my office, the Eco Village Rügen, and it's actually 9 prefabricated timber houses that are built on a former agricultural co-op site. It's rural cohabitation, really, so it started off with a number of people who wanted to build there, who wanted to share certain things, and who wanted to build as sustainable as possible. And the site was heavily contaminated, so this project actually helped to regenerate this landscape. There was a development plan already that showed 5 larger complexes, and the idea was to break down these plots into smaller units, and through that forming 3-sided courtyards leaning on a local, actually vernacular typology, so these 3-sided farmsteads that you see here. A binding design guidance that everyone had to sign up for was stating sustainable building materials, so the timber construction, but also timber facades, mostly untreated and carbonized timber facades. And the design guidance also gives construction build-ups, so very simple construction build-ups. The idea was also that some families could finish off the houses themselves, so they would just commission the structure and the facade and the roof. And it all happened during COVID. First we wanted to build with a CLT timber from Austria, and because of COVID, prices went up. And we could actually only realize this project through this modular approach. It's based on 2 typologies only. And in the end, we ended up working with a local sawmill and building everything in timber frame. There are several shared facilities, a communal garden, workshops, also an electric car that people can use. And there's also a small summer kitchen from recycled materials on the site. One thing that I had to try out, of course, is seasonal dwelling in these houses, which very much relates to the specifics of island life. People live completely different in summer than in winter, so there's a main unit to the left and another unit to the right that could be rented out as holiday flat, or it could be an office. And in the middle, it's a central space. It's a kitchen and living that you share, and you can open up completely in summer, so it becomes an external covered space. The design guidance actually also forbids things, which are fences or carports or funny garden sheds to allow nature to grow back naturally into the site. Towards the end, I will quickly show you a small project, a very small project, which I would maybe not really call artistic, but it's more of a spatial inquiry. It's a traveling pavilion, the seasonal salon, passing through different bioregions or landscapes on its way from Rome via Rügen, the island that I'm living on or based on, to Riga, so to the Baltic Sea region. where it has arrived this summer. And it's actually also a method. I called it Knowing Through Making, the Seasonal Pavilion as Framework for Experimentation, which was presented at the Conference for Bioregional Architecture and Design Practice at TU Munich last year. So it started off its journey at the German Academy in Rome in June last year, where it was dressed in grass from the park of the Villa Massimo, so from an urban context, biogenic leftovers from an urban context. But also with another traditional building material from Italy that I had no idea of, which is called strama, or rope grass, and it's a very unfamiliar image for me to imagine Italy with houses thatched in grass. Anyway, and of course I found Alberto Scano. I have a talent for finding these people in the Pontine marshes in between Rome and Napoli, who showed me how this worked. It was also a student project, a design-build project with students from Rome, so a modular structure on floatable pontoons that could move through Europe, basically. And it made its first appearance at the Art Fest in Rome, and it was dressed also in grass, where the beekeeper Erika has her bees flying around, so the pavilion actually smelled very much like the honey was tasting. It then moved to Stuttgart and stayed 2 months in the heart of Weissenhofsiedlung, opposite to Mies van der Rohe, and it was dressed in several types of grass. So a new summer dress was woven with grass from wetted peatlands close to the Alps, with students from KIT Karlsruhe, and then moved to Rügen this May with students from the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, where I'm teaching right now, and we worked with another bioregional material, with reed. And of course, since it's Salon, it's not only just a workshop or students experiencing or experimenting with materials, but it's bringing people together. So we had local people, we had a local reed thatcher, we had an institution for renewable resources, we had the German Meyer Center. So the idea was very much to come together and talk how we can use these materials in the future and what obstacles and things are hindering us doing so. A big discussion followed in the end, a panel discussion, and it was also part of the Women in Architecture Festival. So we're talking about situated approaches in bioregional architecture. The pavilion then, and the students from Vienna, we continued our journey to Riga and dressing the pavilion in birch bark, a traditional material used as waterproofing membrane, but I will not go into this right now. The reason why we went to Riga was because of a combined design studio between the Academy of Fine Arts and Riziba University in Riga, engaging with what I would call future Baltic landscapes. And we were looking into peatlands. We have a lot of peatlands in Northern Europe, which have been drained in history. And the rewetting of these peatlands has a big potential, of course, as CO2 storage and to slow down climate change, and of course to grow building materials on these rewetted lands. So these two design studios who worked as twin studios were exploring this approach. So we were investigating the materials that we could grow on rewetted peatlands. These would be, for example, reed, moss, typha, and other materials that have been traditionally grown, but of course also materials that in the future we can use in construction. And the very much the challenge is to think architecture together with landscape. So how does a building work or develop as something grows around it? How can the material become part of, or the architecture can initiate processes of transformation, not only in architecture, but also in the regeneration of landscapes. And I wanted to play this, and I don't know if this works. Yes. So you have to think of what happens in spring, who is planting plants, where do they go, where are they harvested, can they be dried, and can this drying process become part of the architecture? Can it become part of the facade, the roof? How is it then taken away, maybe sold? And how do local communities and economies actually benefit from these kind of projects? And of course, it's not only about traditional building materials, but also future materials. These two students were looking into membranes or textiles made from grass that grows in rewetted peatlands. So a very much a future outlook onto how we can see architecture. And this is, of course, an idea of a project where it can be moved. It's a temporary structure that can maybe move to different landscapes and help regenerate them. Okay, I'm playing this now. So towards the end, and maybe just quickly, these student projects, of course, are also some form of research, and they have been presented in an exhibition as a side event to a big conference that is happening this week as well, and we have been speaking beginning of the week. It's the RRR 2025, Renewable Resources from Rewetted Peatlands. And the exhibition is still open. I don't know if any of you are in that part of Europe. And it's shown at the Caspar David Friedrich Institute. So thank you very much.
Segue-se a mesa redonda sobre o tema com Suzanne Brorson, Cláudia Escaleira, Cristina Veríssimo e Inhazi Pérez Hernal, sob moderação de Jorge Fernandes.
Can we start? Yes, okay, it's already working. So, good morning to all. I have the hard task of moderating this materials session. I think it's not going to be easy. It is a very broad topic. We already discussed some of points we would like to discuss, but it took more time than the time that we have to discuss all these topics. So I think we will narrow a little bit and see how the talk flows. Just before their personal presentations, I'm going just to try to contextualize the importance of being here discussing around materials. So why are we now so concerned about the embodied carbon in materials and all the impacts around? And why we're trying to find positive materials or regenerative materials to face all the problems that we have in the building sector? As the buildings became more energy efficient and operational carbon has been being reduced, the weight of embodied carbon in materials is gaining increased relevance. And so nowadays, just a few materials that are ubiquitous in construction and used in all types of buildings are responsible for around 70% of the global carbon, the embodied carbon in buildings. And these materials that I'm talking about are only concrete and steel. In a building, 70% of embodied carbon is for carbon and steel. They are amazing materials, but probably we have to find alternative solutions for the uses that where concrete and steel are not the only materials to be used. Additionally, we are building the same way everywhere. So if it is in Porto, if it is in Africa, in Barcelona, wherever. So I think we have to diversify the range of materials that we use. Beyond that, we are still facing the linear paradigm. So in the very short way, we dig a hole to extract the materials. We use the materials, and at the end of the life, we dig another hole, put the materials back, but with less quality and a lot of pollutants. So we have to make an effort to try to create a circular economy. That's kind of a big word for this. But according to the Circular Gap report, only and less than 9% of all materials used came from circular inputs. And this number has decreased according to the last report, okay? And that if we move to a circular inputs, we can reduce the impact of materials of the embodied carbon of materials by 56%, what is a lot. So We really need to change and to give this positive turn for materials to change something. Beyond that, we need also materials that have a positive impact and that they stock carbon, as bio-based materials, simple materials, etc. With these amazing speakers, we are going to try to discuss some of the points around these topics and see how their options or their choices or their opinion can be a contribution to change this paradigm of materials. Thank you to all. So we'll start with the presentation of Claudia, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah? So
Okay.
let's move on.
Can I start? Okay. So thank you, Casa da Arquitectura, José Pedro Sousa and George, and also thank you, Suzanne, for showing so clearly some paths and beliefs, it seems that, for me, that we really share. So in this presentation, I'll show a little bit my path. To determine when and how the role of materials within ecology and sustainability framework became central, I used this opportunity to start from my college years and first years of practice which marked all my journey as an architect. At the time, between 1995 and 2005, the most important discussion about sustainability and ecology I heard were in an optional course in urban ecology, international models, as well as a seminar on sustainable and energy efficient construction promoted by the National Board of Architects. I was excited about the promises of change brought about by these discussions. I was so naive. The practice in architecture studies quickly demonstrated that the difficulty and resistance to apply what had already been recognized as necessary. These concepts were not a priority in building design. A feeling of unease settled in, one that has been with me ever since. While still working in an architectural practice office, I returned to university to address the two topics that linked my concerns: building renovation and sustainable construction. Regenerative future was not a concern then. Studying more freely disconnected from the current practices constraints made it possible to go deep into questions such as which are the impacts of building materials in resource depletion, which are the impacts of building materials in waste generation, but more importantly, if we already knew the problems, which strategies were being proposed so that future building operations needed, renovation, new construction, addition, and so on, wouldn't rise at the same issues. I was seduced by the rational perspective that one of the deeper problems of materials were the joining and connecting methods used to put them together, as they didn't allow future separation. Therefore, designing buildings with reversible connections and joints was the solution to follow. By designing reversible connections, building components and products would be easily separated, what would allow for their usability, prolonging its useful lifetime, reducing the amount of waste sent to landfill, and reducing the need for sourcing new materials. Simple, no? The research then conducted to the understanding that in fact we can build with reversible connections, but not surprisingly, that could also imply using different types of construction systems and materials from local ones, as obviously not all are reversible. Otherwise, we wouldn't have identified that as a problem. So we apply reversible connections and we change the systems and materials now. At the time, I was fortunate to be integrating a team of architects and engineers specialized in inspection and design for existing buildings. We worked not only on building renovation design, but also developed technical scientific assessment reports of existing buildings, heritage buildings, historical buildings, urban buildings, but also vernacular buildings. My role was that of looking carefully at every crack, stain, spot, deformation, and absence in buildings, representing it and looking for its causes, informing designers of possible structural solutions, ventilation mechanisms, the introduction of humidity barriers, and so on. As a designer, I knew any intervention in these buildings might ask for a different set of considerations regarding the safeguard of traditional practices, historical value, nature of materials used, among others, that might or not be compatible with reversible connections, the reasonable solution for a better future. At this point, the feeling of unease got stronger. Which kind of social or cultural questions would such a change in construction systems imply? What would be lost? How would buildings users and building communities react to these changes? Were they able to accept them? Should they? What if they refused? This was a crucial point where sustainability as a frame of mind rather than a goal became installed. environmental and economic interdependency with the social and cultural aspects of sustainability, which were rooted in local communities, practices, built environment, and nature. Coincidentally or not, at that point, I became in contact with the works of Rotter in Belgium and Bellestock in France, focused on reuse of existing building components. The notion that reuse is a preferable solution for preventing landfill and source of new resources for the built environment was not new. It was the base for justifying reversibility. But instead of considering the ability of components to be reused, its reusability, and speculating on future uses that might happen in 5, 10, or 15 years, or unknown future, these studios and entities were focusing on the implementation of reuse from the actual existing building stock being demolished and developing reuse strategies and identifying the agents of the flow of these components from the pre-demolition process, the demolition work site, the storage, the design for reuse, and application in new building work. From unease to trying to act. This perception of possible action completely changed the direction of the work that was interesting me to develop. From this focus on reusing what already exists in the building, we demolish or renovate. Together with Johnny Pugh and Clara Val, we co-founded in 2023 Nada Novo, Nothing New, an association that promotes the reuse of components and construction materials and explores the cultural changes of their application. Bringing along other colleagues, we started working on the questions of how to reuse, where are the materials for reuse, how do people deal with reuse, are they willing to do it? Reuse already exists, of course, and so we try to find and bring into light that forgotten and hidden activity that exists since the beginning of construction. Together with communities, we search and explore to understand how we can bring reuse into current practices by different means other than strictly research ones, such as artistic ones, construction workshops, and publications on reuse. We look for what is already there. Who sells the materials, who works with this kind of materials, who are the architects that reuse components in their designs but are rarely referred as such. Although we are exploring local strategy and local knowledge, this work is being done in a collaborative way. We exchange experiences and possibilities and strategies about technical, social, and cultural aspects with entities from Europe with more experience than we do have. We believe that hardly one main change will put us in the direction of the urgent change needed. This is an understanding of a permanent work in progress, of test and error, to see what works and what doesn't, hoping to contribute to a positive turn. Sorry for the delay.
30 seconds. So I don't know who is next, but I think it's Ignacy.
Okay.
I don't know.
I think it's Christina.
It's Christina? Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, it's me?
Yes. I don't
Okay,
know.
okay. Let me go there. Okay. Thank you, everybody. While they put in my presentation, okay, it's up. Thank you so much to be here. It's just a joy to me to have so many people interested in the same topics as I do. But actually, this idea became many years ago when I saw that cartoon that was telling me that me as an architect, we have to take a better care of the planet. And the data that we have this year is not helping. So if we want to leave something for the next generations, let's work together. So my interest was passion for a material that we have in our culture. And of course, I start with tradition. I study as much as I could about the material. I got to the experts, that some of them are in the audience. And I started to do workshops, trying to bring the students to this opportunity to learn from such a super material, because a lot of materials in nature are super materials, and cork is one of them. We start to work with cork as a membrane. We did even large pieces with it, and then as a cladding, an opportunity as a cladding, and then the pieces that we did quite large scale, and then as a self-supporting material. We even built quite a large dome with it. And then through time, I started to be interested in other things, garbage. So we did a workshop where the students were looking for garbage and were introducing it in architecture. So this was in Coimbra University. These tiles were found on the outside and the students assemble in a different way. Other leftovers such as cans and so on, that we did something with it. But the reuse of materials or the garbage is something interesting. This is in Canada. A lot of students that I have are interested in materials that are no longer used in architecture. Hillgrass is one that in this case is a particular material that area, and a student came up with this idea of pressing it and transform it and include it in architecture as in traditional times. This one is WEMP. WEMP is a super material too. And this is a student that was trying to work with it, and he did his thesis using fabric, using, pressed materials, and even as a mortar. Finally, this one, she's using wool. Sorry about the title, but it's actually wool. Wool in Canada, believe it or not, is going to the garbage, which is unbelievable. So she was trying to introduce it back in architecture, and I keep on using the word back. As a curatorial, we did 2022, we were the curators of Triennale Terra, and one of the exhibitions was actually talking about materials. So some of them was about savaging, like Claudia already talked a lot today, but how can we look back into materials that we are no longer using? And so examples all over the world that they took, some of them including the work of students. In this case, is a particularly interesting one because they make, you see that booklet on the back, is a lot of pages. It's like trying to understand how can we disassemble buildings which are made out of concrete, and how can we reuse the concrete in other ways. So this was an opportunity there. And this is another exhibition where there was the use of wheels from the cars that they were using in order to do just a temporary installation. But again, materials that can be introduced in architecture in different ways. Finally, my professional practice, we had a challenge to do a small village in Africa, in Cabinda. And at the time we went there and we tried to use local materials, and how could the local materials, with the support of the population and how the population could work the material, we managed to do a design where we teach the population to use some of the materials. They could not see it as possible to be used in architecture. So these are examples of what I love about materials. Thank you.
Already saved 30 seconds now.
I have 37 more seconds for me. Okay, I have brought no presentation. Okay, and this is because when you explain me what we had to talk about, and coming as an architect from the industry, from the industrial part, let's say, and that our focus is to make hundreds of thousands of houses per year, no? So like a car factory. I thought that I would be more useful bringing some thoughts, okay? So to bring some thoughts, I have brought some books that are explaining what is our worries about what means regenerative, no? And how we can make new architecture. We have seen how to use natural processes, vernacular systems, and how to find materials in the place, no? But how to make this from an industrial point of view, no? So I have brought some books because my experience also comes from the digital point of view, no? And being CEO of BIM Academy, you can imagine what means for me building information modeling when you are talking about regenerative, no? So the first one is it's called The Society of Transparency, and is made by one guy from South Korea, Byung-Chul Han, is a philosopher, but he's talking about what happens when everything is transparent. And when we are talking about BIM, Building Information Modeling, what we need is transparency from all of the stakeholders that are working in the same project. And normally, or at least in Spain, this is not happening, no? Because you try to make your own business and to try, we have some tricky point in our budgets, that is that you can say, this wall will be made with this kind of gypsum or similar. So the builder normally takes the similar one, right? When we are making all of this in a digital way, what I do need is to know exactly which is the material that I have there, okay? So this transparency and everything that means this transparency in this process is something important, no? The next one is Daniel Inenarity, that is called the Society of the Unknown. Okay, so it means that normally what we think is that always we have our truth about anything, no? And we think that we have the right data for that. And he is demonstrating that, in fact, we are in a society that we do not have any idea of what is happening because we do not have the right data, the right knowledge, and anything that could be useful for that, no? The next one is by Thierry Kazakian. He died like 10 years ago, and he made a very, very nice book called Design and Développement Durable. So this in French means sustainability. So sustainability in English is sustainability. In Spanish is sostenibilidad. In Latin American Spanish is sustentabilidad. That means something different. But in French is durable development. This means something different, okay? And the book is a very nice book. It means when it will arrive the era or the time when the things will be light. So he's explaining architecture and design, putting in a different point of view what is heavy and what is light, the lightness of our materials, no? And this is something important when you are talking about industrial processes. The next one is the Guide of Constructability. This is made by the Consorcio de Construcción Industrializada in Chile. And they begin with talking about things like lean project delivery or lean construction. You know that in the industrial world, they are using what is known as lean management. And recently, from one Nordic guy, Lauri Koskela, in the 90s, he began to think how lean management that is used in a Toyota factory in Japan could be used in something as easy as to make a house, no? And he transformed this term into lean construction, no? This is something very, very interesting. And the last two ones, one is called Otra Mirada. So I think that what we need is to make a very hard reflection about how we have to see things in another way, and we have to oblige ourselves to see things in another way in order that we can understand in something that it is so difficult as this concept that José Pedro Sousa has put over the table as regenerative, no? And the last one, and I finish here, is by Daniel Kahneman, and he is a Nobel Prize. It's strange because he's a psychologist, but he won the prize for economy. And it's really nice because he says that, well, the title is Pensar rápido, pensar despacio, so to think quick or to think slower. But he says that normally, and this is why he won this Nobel Prize, is that when we see something, we have very quickly some thoughts that are defining this, no? And that is called something quite similar to intuition, no? You see, I see you, and I think, this woman is like this or like that, or no, but there is another part of our mind, of our brain, that obliges us to think slower, something that needs a reflection. No? And I do think that this regenerative concept is obliging us to think in another way. No? And this is why I don't brought any presentation, because it would take the double of time. So sorry for that.
No, it was great because it was a book review for all of us.
Yes, I'm not a librarian or a bookseller, but this is, I think it can be useful for the people that is interested in to try to think how regeneration or regenerative methods could be implemented in doing architectural products or processes, no, or objects.
Okay, thank you very much. It was great insights, and we were trying to narrow the thing, and you widened it again. But thank you, Ignacio. Thank you. So just to first question for all of you, just to warm up, and then I will ask specific questions for each one of you. I will start with a central question of this roundtable that was already defined by organization. And for each of you, what is the most urgent material shift that we must take now to reach regenerative construction? I know it's a hard question to start, but I think we can kill this one right now, and then we relax. Okay?
Okay, I've written my answer to that question because it was in. I tried to end. I know. I tried to end my presentation with "we believe that the turn," and I say "we" because I don't like to think alone. I like to think with other people and share. So we believe that hardly one main change will put us in the direction of the urgent need. The urgent change needed. So a work in progress, test and error, see what works, see what doesn't, and sharing and testing, but looking, slowing the thinking. So more than one fits all or one change alone. So I'm not sure if this is clear, but this is our position regarding the idea of how we can go for a positive turn, to think together, to share, and to test, experiment, and see what works and where it works.
Okay, thank you.
Well, from my point of view, I began to, when you asked me about regeneration and regenerative position, I began to think what I had at home about regeneration or things like this, no? And I only found cosmetics. And I thought, regenerative skin, no, it's regenerative. So you made me to think a lot, because how I can regenerate architecture, no, as I can make something in my skin, or in fact, my presentation for today, I was thinking in bringing the change of the face of Michael Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember? No, and it was something amazing. No, I'm serious. I'm serious in the sense that how one guy can change his face in that way, no, and to begin from black to white. No, this was and for me this was to try to understand my position, how somebody can regenerate himself, no? How you can put new organs in your body, how you can put new blood in your body, etc., etc. No? So for me, I have to say that it's difficult to fix my position about regenerative architecture. No? What I can understand is how one urban planning, how one building or how one material is increasing the value of the city, of the house, or the system, you know? And to make this positive impact in something is something that I would say it depends of the design of the architect, but also how this, I would say, positive social impact, that this is another kind of impact, not environmental one or not constructive one, etc., could be made, no? And this is probably my position, no? That how, when you are building, you are making a positive impact there.
Okay, thank you, Ignacy. Yeah, when we talk about regenerative architecture, we are talking in a broader sense that architecture as a part of an ecosystem. So the part that you mentioned with the social impact is also involved in this
One
process.
of them.
Yeah, is one of the parts.
That's right.
Not
That's
only
right.
the environmental part.
That's right.
It's easy to think immediately in the part environmental part because we say ecosystem, and so it's our first thought
Well,
around
it
the
can be
question, but
understood also because for me, the definition of sustainability has three vectors, no? The environmental one, the economical one, and the social one, no? So it's one third of the problem, no? Or the solution.
Yeah, sometimes, okay, I don't have to explain my thoughts because the stage is yours, but sometimes I have some difficulties with the part of adding more terms and concepts to something that is already complex. People are now trying or starting to understand what is sustainability. And when we reach this point, we give another term. Now it is regenerative and is even harder to achieve. So sometimes it's difficult to convince people to be with us when we say that no, sustainability. No, it's not the trend now.
Yeah.
Now the trend is to be regenerative. And sometimes we are talking about the same thing, but trying to push a little bit further.
But to define well the things is something that we were yesterday talking, no, about which is the definition for each one of us of regenerative, no? And this is the difficulty, you know, because when you know what are you talking about, you can begin to explain that, no? If not, this is how difficult it has been for me to think about regeneration.
Yeah,
no?
because truly it's difficult. It's a kind of utopian term because it's something that when you have architecture and an ecosystem that can evolve in a healthy way without intervention or almost without intervention. So it's a kind of a perfect integration of everything. So it's very difficult to achieve.
Yeah.
So, but we have to try to target that goal.
That's
It's like what
that's
can
right.
I think?
That's right.
But thank you, Ignacy, for your thoughts. Christina.
Thank you for the question and for the thoughts. This is a point, of course, words are very, very important, but we need action. And in my point of view, resources are scarce, and we have to think differently. So my answer is not which is the material. I would say we have, as architects, to think the way we use resources in different ways. And we have to be very careful because there should not be garbage, there should not be leftovers. And we have to be very creative because we have so many opportunities that we only look at a certain way. We have to look this way in the future. So what we call as materials that we only see an application, we have to think of other applications the material can have. Now, luckily, the industry is doing an effort to really change. And I even thinking, do you know that one of the materials that been more transformation is cement? The production of cement is one of the materials that has been more changes. So hopefully in the future, this material can also have a better balance that right now is one of the worst. So what I'm saying is we need everything, but our eyes are the first ones that need to change as architects.
Okay, Thank you, Christina. Suzanne, your turn.
I think that maybe, is this on, yeah? I think maybe since I'm working in a very rural context, I'm confronted with transformation of landscapes or processes that are happening, and I see this and I hear about it, and I try to understand what they're trying to do, what's happening. So forestry is trying to become regenerative and agriculture. And I think that maybe what design means for an architect means that we have to think how we integrate with these transformation processes of landscape. So maybe it widens, we have to widen our perspective and to really gain this knowledge to understand what materials are becoming available and how does this tap into the production of building materials and what's waste, which waste is there, can I use it for something? And I think that we are not suddenly becoming material scientists, we're still architects, so I think we have to involve a lot more disciplines to really understand what we're doing. I always feel uncomfortable proposing things without really knowing what I'm talking about, so I have to get this expertise from other disciplines very much. I think we have to do this a lot more.
Okay, thank you. It were great inputs. I don't know if we answered the question, but okay, we have food for thought. So, starting with the specific questions to each one of the speakers, I would like to start with something that I think is very important. That instead of thinking first on using new materials or starting with excavations, etc., we started the conversation by using what we already have. Or reusing what we already have in the buildings. And so it is for you, Claudio, you know.
I'm sure.
I will ask you one question regarding the part of reusing and recovering materials, because it will be one of the main activities in the near future. In some countries already, some architecture office doing a great work on that part of recovering and reusing materials in architecture. And so how can we design buildings that use less materials? Okay. How can we expand the life cycle of buildings, since buildings are already there, the materials are already there, and to decrease or to reduce their life cycle impact?
Okay, so if I talk, okay. So
if I can put the question in another term, probably it's easier for you.
Okay.
How can we see buildings as material stocks?
Okay.
Okay, to be reused cycling.
Okay. So from the perspective of reuse and not from the perspective of building renovation, which is not the same. So if we are considering looking at a building, we need to understand, because right now we don't have the transparency that probably BIM will provide for future buildings. We need to understand what is there. So we need to look at it, we need to know how it works, we need to know which materials are, try to understand the constructive systems and materials that were used, because depending on when the building was built, it is different. The knowledge we might have or not about how it was done, which materials were used, or you need to test inside, for example. So this process is the part of the technical assessment report, where we need to understand and to decide if we are going to maintain the building and use it and changes the least possible, so that material that had already a previous cycle keeps being used in the same place. So this is one question, reusing the building, let's say. But if for some reason it is determined that that building needs to or will be end its life, so depending on the systems used, we can, and the economics, of course, we can, and the money available for it, we can dismantle the building, deconstruct the building, or demolish the building. And knowing the knowledge that we had about how the building was done will also inform this process, and also inform what can we reuse, or at least the potential elements of the building for reuse. So this is the notion of building as material banks. So is the urban mining that's starting in electronics and now goes to the old building. So the idea of building as kind of available mine, the city as the future mine, considering that some buildings will last longer, be more durable than others, but social needs might imply that they need to be demolished because they do not fulfill the technical requirements for providing the conditions of living for the city. So we need to deal with what we will remove from the buildings understood as material banks. So we put ourselves in the place of, okay, someone, of course we can be inside of that or outside that process, decided that that building will no longer keep its living, so the material will be removed. And what we are working on is how do we create this attachment with these elements so that we keep giving them value to be somehow reused again. Then we could discuss what reuse means, okay? So this is another discussion. But so that they can get back to the cycle without losing their shape or with small changes in shape, with the same function or changing the function, and so there the architects are crucial. So if I had a window, I cannot use it as a window. How am I going to use it now? What will it be useful for? Or, for example, one of the images, we had PVC shutter blades that we dismantled and used in the pavilion. So there's nothing to do with the original function, so we couldn't discuss or not if that is reuse. So it has to do with the way we look, with the way we connect with materials, and that's, we believe, like Suzanne said, we need to put your hands in the material, need to be close to them to understand. I think, so we kind of reverse. I think the idea of the seminar starting from the materials and not from the city has to do with this, because right now we realize that materials really have a huge impact. And I'm not sure if it answered the question, but I'm trying to separate the difference between reuse of building and reuse of components.
Yes, okay, yeah. But that part is important, the part of the scale of the building and the scale of the components. You talk about the building as material banks and the urban mining, and regarding these two concepts, the thing is the buildings that we have now were not designed to be disassembled.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we reuse materials from buildings that are going to be demolished or demounted?
Yeah. How can we do it?
How can we do it? Or is it possible to do it?
Yes, it's possible because it's being done, and like we named ourselves, it's nothing new. It's been done as you go to the vernacular construction. You have examples of dismantling a building and then using that element. I don't use the word materials because I consider material as something shapeless and functionless, if I can say it like this. So trying to understand that the reuse is more associated with something that already had a function attributed to the assigned to the object. So and this is an important difference because we deal with these elements. Of course, the borders are thin, and then we could be here deciding how many cuts from reuse to recycling and things like this. But what I mean is that this already exists and has been done. So we kind of forgot about it. So eventually, there are design for disassembly, studying new types of connections, dry connections, reversible connections for future reuse. Those that exist now, they had a specific, and because they weren't thought for that, they have a set of constraints, a specific set of constraints. For example, we are discussing that we have been seeing something that is in the middle. For example, concrete buildings where slabs are being cut to a specific size, and so they can be transferred for the building that is going to be demolished prior to demolition, and then they are reused in a different place. So here reused legally is not a term, but okay. So we can use the slab and use it in another place. Use eventually steel beams, and then that replaces the need for the slab and concrete. Or wooden beams, or a window that was on the outside does not comply with energy efficiency, so that can be used inside as a dividing panel. So, I don't know, it will depend on the perspective of the architect, looking at all that objects as something that already is there, and that they can look at it understanding different possibilities, instead of starting from scratch, designing everything, and then going to look for it. So, but just to finish, reuse as a set of strategies, a different set of strategies to be applied that vary depending on, for example, whether you start from the material that you already have and that you need to integrate in your building, or if it starts from the principle of reusing something that is in the market and you looking for it in the market afterwards. So these two are completely different, imply completely different design strategies, and other in between.
Okay.
I'm not sure if now this.
Yeah, you have complemented very well, and I think now we are in the point that we need no specialists for doing projects for dismantling buildings. Instead of demolishing everything, now you have to have specialists to go to the building and see, okay, I'm going to use this one, I'm going to use this slab with this 3x3 or not, and the rest, I don't want it.
We have some. We already have. The question is if people are willing to pay for it. And if they can continue the flow. If they know that the components they will recover will be used by an architect or a contractor. So the problem is you need to go through all the flow. The knowledge is in every stage. They are not connected.
Yeah.
The knowledge exists.
Okay, I think we are going to talk later on about the stakeholders and if they want to pay or not, and also how the mandatory legislation and the carbon, etc., will influence their motivation to pay or not. Now to Christina, try to make a bridge here with two kind of strategies that I think will be very important to reduce or to have a positive impact in buildings, how to reduce their environmental footprint. On bio-based materials, you bio-based on geo and bio-based materials, earthen materials and bio-based. You show us some of your research on the cork. You showed also other natural materials. How your research and your practice in architecture get connected? How natural materials influence your practice, and what were the challenges?
That's a great question. No, and the reason is very simple, because in terms of research, you can be very creative and very open. But when you have a practice, you have legislation to guide you. And a lot of things I'm doing in my research, I can't apply them directly in my practice because I don't have the materials are not being tested enough, because in research we do some, experimental things. And therefore the use of some of these research needs to go through a lot of stages until is accepted by, let's say, the people which are really going to stamp your building and say it's okay. So legislation is a really important figure here that we have to rethink, because a lot of the materials we are reusing, if we want to use it in the building, some of the things will not be accepted. We have to remember this. We have lots of legislation regarding fireproof, regarding seismic, especially in this country. But there are other things which are very, very important for me to tell you. The society needs to change mentalities. And I remember, for example, the material that I'm in love with, which is cork. It was so used in Portugal in the 60s that became associated with low classes. The industry, they've been doing a great job because nowadays this material completely shift the society and enter in the society through other eyes, that now the material is totally pushed to the high position of a very sustainable and ecological material. So we have to also change others which are not in our profession, because sometimes the clients or even the society are not prepared for some changes. Okay, so this is quite important. Culturally, there is another thing. We keep on talking, but we are in the global north, let me put it this way, and the global south is another way. So when I'm working there, I see a lot of things they collect, the global north discharge, especially garbage. And for example, me that I'm working in Canada, in teaching in Canada, the Canadians suddenly got crazy because Philippines is no longer taking their garbage. So be it. Let's take care of the garbage we are doing. You see, these mentalities have to change. I'm sorry, this is really crucial for the future.
Thank you, Christina. You touched in two things I have, in two topics I had here prepared for later on, but probably we can start already talking about it. And okay, to spare you some time, I will start with Ignazi. That is regarding regulation, standards, and the part of creativity. And if this kind of ambition, regulation, or legislation is sometimes too narrow, can be perceived as limiting creativity. And beyond that, if these constraints sometimes also can be new opportunities to try to escape to this narrow vision of legislation.
It's me.
Ignazi, or
yeah,
it's a broader question for all of you.
Yeah, of
okay,
course,
this
because
is for all of
we
you.
all
Sorry,
touch the same topic.
sorry. This is for all of you.
About normative, I think, and regulations, I do think that we have to reflect, to make a very hard reflection about that. No, I do think that we need regulations because we are not doing well our duties. You know?
I agree.
So, because if we would be doing well things, why you have to make this legislation? So, when you think from this point of view, for example, to give you some examples, no? There is a very big factory in Spain that is recycling concrete because they are demolishers, and they thought, let's all of this stuff that we are creating and we are paying as waste to go to a disposal space, let's try to recover this material, no? And they made a factory of 12 million euros to do that. And the problem is that the legislation in Spain only admits less than 5% of recycled concrete to make concrete structures. No? In Holland, it can be 100% of recycled concrete. No? And there are several countries around Europe that is 20%, 30%, 40%, etc. No? So what we need, I can admit that we need more legislation, but what I need is that this legislation has to be more flexible, in the sense, not flexible in the scopes, but it has to be updated quicker than that. No? In Spain, the legislation of concrete is from 1960s. And because I thought, well, what sheet of legislation we have in Spain about concrete, etc., 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 and you think, no, this think slower, okay, and you see that, well, in 1960s there was nobody recovering concrete or recycling concrete, you know, So I do not know how we have this 5%.
Yeah.
You know? So we have to be grateful for that. But what happens that 60 years later, probably the conditions have changed, and we do need more flexibility on that, no? To update all the regulations in a quicker way, no? And we can translate this to all of different materials, etc. No? In Spain, I have one statistic by Green Building Council Spain that it says that 38% of the material that arrives to the site is converted into waste. 38%. So to the construction site. Okay, arrive pallets of bricks. Some of them are broken. Some of them, etc., 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 etc. Pallets, the plastics, everything, and this is going away. No, I cannot admit this. No, so this, from an industrial basis, is completely different. You don't have to have 1 gram of waste. So if we are using rock wool, to say one brand, they are obliged to come to our factory every week and take all our waste because they are recovering this and putting again in their process. Okay, so why it doesn't exist this symbiosis in our process? And this is something that it's important to say that all wet construction is affected for that. No? This gypsum is difficult to recover. Or you have to add, how many energy are you thinking that you are able to put in a new process to recover this material? No? And this is why, in our case, we are talking about disassembly. No? And disassembly means that you can recover all the materials that you are making. But then you have to study very well joints, no? And this dry construction. So everything has to be assembled, like this roof, perfect, but not these walls, and not this floor, you know? And here, probably you can recover 20-23% of this volume that we have here. Is that okay or not? No, I can recover this concrete because I can smash it, etc., but I have to put more energy. The gypsum, the same, etc., etc., etc. No, and we have to be conscious about that. No? So how many new energy we want to apply to recycle something, and normally it's better to reuse something. So to reuse something, you have to design in another way.
Okay. Continuing with this part of the regulation and standards, you, Christine, what do you think? Do you agree with the opinion of Ignazi? Do you have a different opinion regarding limiting creativity or being an opportunity to do things differently?
We have to change, and most of it, again, we have to reach the society, the normal people, because in fact, they are going to dwell into other homes which contains materials that are being from other places, and they must understand the quality of that instead of looking at it as an old thing that doesn't match some patterns they have in their minds. They have to treasure it. I have to say, I am quite amazed that nowadays nobody saves anything. And I think one of the things, in terms of society, used to have our parents' or grandparents' house full of things that we would go to the attics or the basement to grab. Those basements and those attics do no longer exist, and I'm so happy that Claudia is finding people that are savaging those things for us, because nowadays nobody saves anything. So we are constantly going to all these new things, I'm not going to say names, but because we don't have a way to keep a bed from other people and we have to buy a new one. So I'm using objects as an example, but you can transform this to a house or to a building.
Yeah, everything is disposable. Everything is disposable.
We dispose everything. It's a problem.
You mentioned an interesting point of the part of the people knowing or being aware of other kind of indoor environments or other kinds of buildings using different materials. Okay, and there is one example I like because of social housing in Ibiza, high quality architecture with low carbon materials, local materials, low carbon, and with I will call it non-conventional materials, compressors, blocks, seaweed as insulation, etc. And that kind of, I will say, a positive image, because when people look to the building, it doesn't look as social housing. I'm going to put this connotation here. It looks like high standard quality architecture, but built with low carbon materials. They don't have less or lower quality. They have a good quality, and they look good, and they just have a lower impact. In the conference from Albert Cucci, it said, okay, we have not defined the benchmarks of embodied carbon, but if we take the numbers from Denmark, these buildings in Ibiza are already complying without being mandatory to do it. So these kind of good examples that we need to motivate people and see that it's possible. Ignacio, please.
Well, it's something. It's a very nice question, this one, because if we are architects, all of us, we are architects, no? Here, all of you are architects. No, there is some engineer, other people. Okay. No, I'm saying this to be polite. Let's say my opinion is that architects have lost our good design. Okay? In the sense, when you are asking us if there is a limitation, if we are using disassembly processes, if we are using low carbon materials, and I don't think so. There is one company called Lego, you know, the little bricks, and I have seen with Lego, that is the most standardized piece that exists, I have seen the Sagrada Familia made. So it's not a problem of the pieces. The problem is your capacity to design, right? So is there any limitation if you are using low carbon materials? No. Is there any limitation with this law about concrete or wood or steel frame or whatever? No. This is our work. And this is why I name myself ex-architect, because I'm not able to design well in this way, no? So if you go to Vienna, for example, where social housing begins, all the projects are amazing. Yeah. All of them. Why, if you are going to Portugal or to Spain, and you tell, no, I'm living there, social houses. Well, you will be luckier in the future. Do not mind, Christian. No? Hostia? This is our work, or not? Because it depends also, we had a theory also, when we were directing one magazine in Barcelona called Quaderns de Arquitectura, and we were discussing this. Do you need money to make good design? And my opinion was that if you have, the problem of making good design normally comes when you have a lot of money. Because normally, big villas, extremely healthy clients are not making good architecture. And you can see Bill Gates' house, Trump's house, it has no interest, you know? And then there are very few architects that with a lot of money are making good architecture. Okay, but but normal architects that we do normal, ordinary architecture, it's our duty to make extremely nice design. It's our work. If not, call one engineer, or one building engineer, or one factory to make the house. So this is something that I'm against. So standardization is not giving you less tools to make great architecture. And then I do think that architects, we are losing space here. We are losing power here. We are not talking with Amorim, with all of this, that every day you are able to make a visit or a meeting with some company, some producer, some manufacturer. And this is a pity from my point of view.
Okay, thank you, Ignacy. Taking some of the points that you talked now and about good design, etc., I'll move to Suzanne, because Suzanne shows us inspiring work with very interesting work, a kind of a new vernacular, using local materials, prefabrication, using a local workforce. So a lot of good positive points around this. And I would like to ask you if these kind of decisions for prefabrication, the choice of local materials, was or is a normal consequence in your design process, and which kind of difficulties or challenges did you face to use this kind of materials, not only for you as experimenting these materials and the normal doubts if it is suitable or not, and how people accepted the living in a house with using this kind of materials?
It was mainly owed to the size of the project. So it was like the first phase was 9 houses or 9 double houses. So it was a fairly large project. And it was also the COVID time. And so the timber prices went up super much. And of course, it was just making it a lot more economic. So it started. It was individual. So I was assigned individually by the clients, but we kind of developed this project together, so that we could tender it as one big project to the local sawmill. And that's why the modularity and the prefabrication made a lot of sense, because it got a lot cheaper. We had 2 structural schemes only, so it was 2 different types of houses. So the engineer costed less, so everyone split the costs. So it was very logical, and in the end, it was nothing different to what people did in the past, where certain traditional buildings were built according to a certain typology with a specific way of making the roof. Everyone knew how to do it, and it's a knowledge that they shared in the past, and that in this project people shared. So it was a very parallel way of working in that sense. And coming back to the questions of tectonics very much, I think that's very related to having a structure that is maybe more durable and that would allow for changes. And then there's something else added as a facade with sacrificial layers that you would be able to change, and that doesn't have to last this long, maybe because the material doesn't allow for it. And I think that's something I'm interested in, to view these elements of architecture with a little bit more flexibility or softness, to say, okay, maybe this material is only 5 years. Fine, doesn't matter. Okay, but the rest behind can do more. So that's maybe something that happened in this project to learn how you actually develop the construction and the details of these houses.
Okay, thank you. Trying to move for another topic, also of course connected. One of the topics that we discussed in our preliminary meeting, that I think it is interesting in this case of using not only the part of reused materials or salvage materials, but also the part of local materials. That is a part of the scale. And the local versus I will call it universal or worldly, global materials and the mass production. Okay, local versus the mass production. What is more adequate? I know this is a tricky question. What is more a regional or a local production that sometimes could be or will not be so efficient in the use of resources, but is local as a short supply chain, and it will be decentralized using local labor force, etc. Or it's better to have a centralized mass units, centralized in one place, all the materials come to the same place, but the process is way efficient. What is your opinion? Probably I will start with Ignacy, because Ignacy and digitalization and lean processes.
To hear them before. Okay.
But I can start with Claudia.
It's a great discussion, this one, you know, because do we have to build as assemblers, or do we have to build as builders? No? Local material is always better, in the sense that it's something that is a resource that you are not moving. You have the knowledge of the place. There is one great book about vernacular architecture by Paul Oliver that it's a very big book, if you can read it, because he's making like a collection of all the vernacular architecture that exists in the world. No? The problem is how we can make something like Susanne was showing us in another scale. No? So if I'm interested in using grass or seaweed grass in that country, you found one guy doing that. No? In Italy, one guy doing that. No? So imagine the difficulty of making this in a bigger way. No? There is one factory of shoes called Camper in Mallorca Island that his founder, Llorenç Fluixà, he was thinking in using natural materials, natural leathers, rubber coming from natural plantations, etc., etc. Not to use plastics, etc. No? And he's inviting big architects or very nice architects to each one of their shops. No? But I know no other companies like that, you know, with this concept in the head in order to make something like this. No? And then because people is not making this in the construction and with the demand that we have, it has to exist a kind of industrial way of doing things. No? In our case, what we bet for is to make, let's say, the most advanced way of production, that is the one that comes from automotive companies. No? And this means that they are not fabricating anything, they are not producing anything, but they are assembling materials. Okay, so this means that all materials have to go there. No? When you want to make massive fabrication for that, our problem now is that does it mean that we have to make a very big factory to cover all the global production of housing? No? And there is people that is making this in Poland, in Sweden, in Canada, in the States, in Austria, in Japan, that are big factories that they are making, that is what we are more interested, more than 5,000 units per year. Okay? This is quite a lot, no? If you want to make more than, the maximum one is, for us, is Ichizu from Japan, that they are making 42,000 single houses for Japanese market. So they have to talk with 42,000 town halls to get the permits to make 42,000 foundations, to make 42,000 deliveries, etc. And for me, this is amazing, no? Because what we are thinking in is in making what is called block housing, no? A lot of units in one place and not one by one, no? And this is another kind of industry. So I do think that in order that you say to make what is called flying factories, no? That I have to make a very big project here, so I make a little factory there, I collect all the materials, I put them there in my processes, and I'm delivering this, no? What I think is it's a problem of Excel, you know? So it's economics about that, no? And normally it has nothing to be related to environment or social impact or 0 kilometer resources or something like this, no? And this is a problem. But now, with the new legislation in Europe, you know that, well, I have listened in Portuguese, I think it was that Matosinhos wants to be carbon neutral in 2030. And I do not know how to do that. You know, no, in a serious point of view, no, because all the electricity that you are using here, it has to be renewable, all the materials have to be renewable, etc., etc., etc. So Europe has decided this to be done in 2050, that I do not know how to do it. But we have to begin, if we are good architects and good engineers, we would have to begin to give solutions for that, no? And to see how you make something that is 0 emissions today. One house that is 0 emissions, because the seaweed, no, is part of the roof. But the wood probably is not coming from that place. And the glass, is there a factory in Mallorca to make glass, or to make steel, or to make bricks, or to make concrete? There is no factory for that. You have to import all of this material. How do you do this? You need electrical ships, electrical airplanes, electrical trucks to say that you can do this, or biofuel to do this, or biogas, or hydrogen. The equation begins to have a very big formula to achieve that, no?
Okay, thank you, Ignacio. Claudia, what is your opinion on this topic?
I think it goes in the same direction. It depends. It depends where you are when you raise the question and what you are going to build. So depends on the scale of how many, if talking about housing, for example, how many housing and where? Are we talking about Porto, Lisbon, or are you talking about Covilhã, or are you talking about Sabugal? So it's different if you are talking about the coast, or you are talking about interior and rural areas, or you are talking about small cities in the same country. For example, in Portugal, we have a problem. We are losing the population from the interior to the coast, but we need to reverse this process at least a bit, so that we have population that relates with nature internally and with the forest and all the country that is being kind of neglected. And that has to do with construction methods that we can test there and use there if people are willing to test, to be part of that process. For example, and use materials and systems, for example, in Alentejo, get back to rammed earth in some context. Does it make any sense? Do people want to do it? But you wouldn't do it in Lisbon, or you wouldn't do it in Porto. So it depends where you are, which is the context. And I think, as I try to share, is there's a difference between, and Ignacio referred that, which methods do you use, and the knowledge about the methods is one thing, where you produce is the other thing. So you can have a method that you establish and you test in one place, go to the other place and test that method, or share the method, but you can make the production, the flying factories, or having the knowledge and having conditions to implement the methods on that in the production on that places, and it depends of the local materials. In some places, you don't have local materials to build anymore because there are areas that are so highly urbanized that you don't have it. And so I changed from the scale of materials to the scale of the last panel of the cities because we need to, so I think it goes in the same direction. It depends, so we need to think and share. The example of Suzanne is precisely about that, I think, because we can discuss building 40,000 houses, or we can discuss building 9 in the perfect conditions to build. The 9 depends on the context.
Yes, but from my point of view, we would need better criteria and better guides for that, you know? So, in fact, I don't see that architects are having a very strict or not a strict way of selecting materials, you know, or selecting products. And this is a problem. For us, in our venture, let's say, we are working with AI to make the selection of the products. Because it's different when you are saying, okay, I want to be zero emissions. Okay, then where it comes from, this material. Now in Europe, there is a new concept that is CBAM, that is Carbon Board Adjustment Mechanism, that it makes that when one product arrives to your border in your country, and it has been made in China, India, Uganda, or France, it has an embedded CO2, and you have to make the carbon adjustment, and this product will have to pay a tax for that. No? So for us, this is very important because 0 kilometer origin for one material is something that is making me savings for that. No? But when you are talking about industry, you need lightness. You need the number of operations to put this. You need the number of the operations, so how disassembly this. You need all the characteristics about sustainability, about hygrothermic properties, etc., etc., etc. And then you have an Excel that you have like 28, 30 columns for the same material. And then you need to choose the screw for that, no? And which screw are you choosing? Hilti, I explained you my problem, okay? Hilti, Simpson, Fisher, Worth, and one Spanish guy. Which is giving you the best quality for that? Which is the best material to do this? How many rounds I have to make to put one gypsum plate or one table? And which is the most resistant? Which is giving you more durability, you know, and after, which is the price? So we are using AI. Why? Because it's a mess. How you are comparing these things. And it's a pity because probably the best screw comes from the other side of the world. And then you don't have to use the best screw. It's difficult to decide that, no? So architects, we need to begin to think in these topics, and we have to offer to our clients these solutions, and we have to have at least our own criteria to do that. Yeah. And talking with the architects and engineers, this is no priority for them. Let's say it in this way.
It was an interesting comment. So our time is almost finishing. I had a lot of questions here still unanswered. I will try to merge here two for Christina and Suzanne. Not because I have nothing against you, but you already talked too much. Okay, I'm kidding with you. And so trying to finish, and I will see if the organization give us the more 5 minutes just to open to audience questions. And I will try to merge two things. The part is the role of the architects in all of this, and the part of the role of education for architects, but also for builders and the others. And how can we address this kind of tool, education, to force or to foster innovative, I don't like the part innovative, to foster this regenerative change that we want.
The role of the architect, or the role of education, I think maybe through some of the examples I gave, I think it's about methodology very much, and trying to make students ask the right questions and give them the right tools to move forward, because we will not be able to answer all of these questions. It's super complex, but maybe give them a kind of spirit of liking or learning to experiment and understand what is maybe a sensible way of moving forward. What could I probably solve here, and which things will have to stay in the unknown maybe. And I think that's something that I'm finding extremely interesting, to use teaching as a way of research, maybe what I showed in the last project. Because as an architect, I don't have time to engage with how does the landscape around me change, and what's happening, and to sort of test this and experiment with these things through teaching formats is for me an extremely valuable thing. Finally, I have time to do that, and to imagine several ways of approaching certain problems. So I think that's something I think we lack in our profession, the space to experiment. There's a lot of excitement. Maybe I can quickly talk about this in Germany, about a new building class. It's called Class E, called E for simple or experimental, that very many architects are hoping for at the moment, to give them a little bit more freedom. It's not minimizing safety, but it plays a little bit on the subjective of comfort in architecture. So I hope that there will be more space to move forward through experimentation.
Thank you very much. Christine.
I think she did a wonderful job. We think we can pass to the public.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, now we can open to some questions from the audience. I don't know if anyone has, Adrian, of course.
Thank you very much for a great panel. I have a question to Suzanne. You've shown great examples of use of local materials in a very specific context. And we're in a moment where we could start reusing materials, start using local materials again. How do you think about the scalability of this kind of practice? Because is it the scalability is within the material, or within the teaching other, or co-learning, or finding a practice, how to look for these practices in a different places, or popularize it? Because for a small scale, it is perfect. But then we have the small scale project do not have very great impact. How do you think this project, the project of larger scale, how could it work for a project of larger scale? Yeah, that would be the question.
Okay, maybe I can give an example about the material seaweed or eelgrass that you've also worked with. So on the island that I'm based on, there's a lot of beaches. It's very touristic, and the municipalities are taking every day they go out and collect the seaweed, tons of it, and they have to build sheds. They're investing millions of euros to build sheds to put the seaweed in, which then is dried there, and then it's going to waste. It's not used in construction. But of course, we all know it's a very interesting building material, so it's very abundant. It's not just a few buckets of that, but there's tons of it. So we could use it, it works, but it's not certified as a building material. And funny enough, there's a very small shop in Germany which is selling seaweed to make pillows or what. And through crowdfunding, they have achieved to get a certificate to use seaweed as insulation for walls. And this maybe costs 25,000 euros to certify it, which is nothing if you compare it to the scale of Germany and a coastline of, I don't know, 500 kilometers of where tons of seaweed arrive. And of course, this really makes me question why this is not happening from a different angle, no? Why a small seaweed trader has to do this. So we as architects can finally specify it, and this certificate only is valid for 5 years. So this is something, of course it's scalable, and I think there's a very interesting study from, I think, the university in Aalborg in Denmark, who shows that we could replace the material for board materials by 50% by grass or offcuts or biogenic waste from all sorts of urban contexts or even landscape contexts, and just change that instead of pressing timber or something. So it's doable, and I think it's very scalable. Yeah. Thank you.
Another question? No? No. So it's time to finish. I'm trying to wrap up in through our 3 main ideas. We talked a lot about prefabrication, efficiency of the systems, a lot of bio-based materials and local materials. So probably we need to diversify and open your mind to new materials and try to experiment much more with the materials that we have on site. And also we talk a lot about reusing materials and expanding or extending the life cycle of the buildings that we already have, and to take advantage of that embodied carbon that is already there, and we just need to keep it running without adding much more things to it. We have a role as an architects, researchers, to engage people, and we need to engage people and other professionals to show them that this is the way, this should be the positive turn that we need to reach a regenerative future. So thank you to these 4 great speakers. Thank you for your contributions. And now I think we have to go to lunch. And we continue the talk. So thank you.